Some years ago, our neighbor came pounding on our door. Now, this was a woman who was very attractive, very solid. She was a good mom. She was a great neighbor, but she was deathly afraid because there was a bee in her house. And this was just a fear, apparently, that she had had all of her life. And I walked through her house for her, and there wasn't a bee there, but she was just beside herself in terror. And what were some of your childhood fears? And did you get over them? If you did, but do you remember how you felt? And as an adult now, have you ever been really, truly afraid? I mean, heart pounding fear, pushing everything else out. Have you ever, well, I mean, I've been robbed at gunpoint twice. I surprised a burglar in our apartment. I have been in several near car crashes and a couple that were actually car crashes. And so, I know that it's a time when your pulse is racing and your mind is racing and you're not necessarily thinking sensibly and everything else gets pushed out of the way. Well, welcome to the 19th video in this In Favor series on how we can increase our faith. We're looking to increase our capacity and our ability to trust God and His power in every situation in our life, even in these frightening situations. So these are situations where we respond emotionally to our difficulties, our dangers, and to our disasters. And I'm going to ask you now, if you would, for a moment, just to pause and go download this handout that's connected to the place where you went to on infavorresources.com to get number 19, Holding On to Our Faith While We Are Afraid. This is a series in the series. We're talking about how to hold on our faith, to push back on the circumstances that would cause us to lose our faith in God. And one of those is fear. So our example in this study is Esther, or as some people know her, Hadassah. Now, you remember that she was a Jewess who won a beauty pageant and who had become queen. Esther was faithful, she was intelligent, she was loyal to her family and people, and she had captured the king's heart. She was also an orphan who had been raised by a wise older cousin named Mordecai. Now, the villain in this story, as you remember, is a proud, selfish, arrogant, conniving nobleman named Haman. Ooh. The king honored Haman and commanded that everyone bow down to him at the gates, but Mordecai, Esther's cousin, refused to do that. And it vexed Haman terribly. Although Haman was the only one in the kingdom who refused to do that, it still bothered Haman so much that he hated Mordecai. And now on your handout, Esther 3, these verses that tell the story. When Haman saw that Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honor, he was enraged. And yet, having learned who Mordecai's people were, in other words, those troublemaking Jews, he scorned the idea of killing only Mordecai. Instead, Haman looked for a way to destroy all Mordecai's people, all the Jews throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes. He did this then by deceiving the king and making up lies. Then Haman said to King Xerxes, "There's a certain people dispersed among the peoples in your provinces of your kingdom who keep themselves separate. Their customs are different from those of all other people, and they do not obey the king's laws." Not true. It is not in the king's best interest to tolerate them. If it pleases the king, let the decree be issued to destroy them. And so the king gave him permission and said to Haman, "Do with these people as you please." And so, we're told in verse 13, dispatches were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces with the order to destroy, kill, and annihilate all the Jews, young and old, women and children, on a single day. Now, let's make 4 statements about that situation, that fear-mongering situation. First of all, fill in these blanks on your handout, if you will, as we go along. First, this decree obviously was a threat to every Jew in this vast kingdom. Esther 4:3 says, "In every province to which the edict and order of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews with fasting, weeping, and wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes." There was fear throughout the kingdom. This was a disaster. They were going to die, every one of them. It wasn't for something they had done. It was because they were Jews. Everyone was going to die unless God intervened for his people. Second statement. This decree was a personal threat to Esther, the queen. This decree was a personal threat to Esther, the queen. She had some skin in this game. Mordecai heard about this edict, and he went into mourning. And when Esther heard that her cousin was in distress, she sent a servant to him to ask why. Now, she was living in the palace, and Mordecai wasn't. Mordecai told the servant everything that had happened, and he also gave him a copy of the text of the edict for their annihilation to show to Esther and to explain it to her. And he told him to instruct her to go into the king's presence to beg for mercy and to plead with him for her people, because no one except Mordecai knew that Esther was Jewish. So the servant went back and reported to Esther what Mordecai had said. And then you have this passage on your handout, Esther 4:10. Then she instructed him to say to Mordecai, "All the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman to approach the king in the inner court without being summoned has but one law, that they be put to death, unless the king extends the gold scepter to them and spares their lives." When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer: "Do not think that because you're in the king's house that you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place." Mordecai did not believe that God would completely forsake his people. He said, "But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come into your royal position for just such a time as this." Third statement. Even when the king regretted this decision, it seemed as if it were irrefutable. It seemed unchangeable. It seemed like there was nothing he could do about it. Esther 8:1, "For no document written in the king's name and sealed with his ring can be revoked." That was the law of the Medes and the Persians, that once he said it, if he said it officially, he can't take it back, which in my estimation is a pretty dumb rule. Number 4, the final statement. In spite of her fear, Esther made the decision, the difficult decision, to do the right thing, even if it meant her death. Esther 4:15. Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai: "Go, gather together all the Jews who are in Susa, and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day, and I, my attendants, will fast as you do. And when this is done, I will go to the king, even though it's against the law. And if I perish, I perish." There would have been a lump in her throat. There would have been like a stone in the pit of her stomach. She couldn't possibly have slept. She would have been so afraid at what seemed like a certain demise for her and perhaps for all her people. Now, we all know how this story came out, but they didn't, because they were living it. The danger was real, and their fear was palpable. Well, you know how it turns out. She goes to the king in fear and trembling. She exposes Haman's plot, and the king puts Haman to death. And he issues another edict. Since he can't change the first one, he issues another edict that gives the Jews the freedom to defend themselves with deadly force. Now they're no longer easy pickings. On the day that people come to kill them, they could defend themselves. And as far as we know, not a single Jew died. Well, let's just press into this story and this idea of holding onto our faith even in times of great fear. This comes from deep spirituality. How would we respond if we were given a chance to step up? Would we freeze up, run away, blame someone else, question God, come up with excuses for why it shouldn't be us? The excuse that Esther gave was valid. She could die. Her fear was natural and understandable. But Mordecai wanted to help her see that the impact she was capable of having was greater than the risk. Mordecai believed in Esther even when she didn't believe in herself. He helped her see the purpose and vision God had for her, challenging her to take that leap of faith. That motivated her to take action. Esther didn't stop being afraid. That's important. Courage is not the absence of fear. Esther didn't stop being afraid. Instead, she chose to act despite her fear and rallied her friends and family around her to pray for her as she spoke to the king. If you keep reading her story, you'll see that Esther does in fact speak to the king and saves her people. Even though she kept being afraid, she pushed through anyway because her faith in the purpose for which God had chose her was greater than her fear. Her faith was greater than her fear. Esther could have used Psalm 56 in her situation, which says, "When I am afraid, I put my trust in you, in God, in whose word I praise. In God I trust, and I am not afraid. What can mere mortals do to me?" Remember what Esther said? If I die, I die. I mean, that's the worst they can do to me. This resulted in a song. This story, this situation. You are my hiding place. You always fill my heart with songs of deliverance. Whenever I am afraid, I will trust in you. I will trust in you. You can write something down, a couple things down here in your margin in your handout that I didn't include. First of all, write down, either fear will vanquish your faith, or your faith will vanquish the fear. Hold on to your faith, even when, especially when, you are afraid. And just one other thing, write down Psalm 34:4. This is what it says. I sought the Lord, and he answered me, and he delivered me from all my fears. Hold on to your faith, even when you are afraid.